Okay, hi Michael. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I was reading over your bio when I got the email a couple of hours ago, and I remembered your story very well. The dog's name was Roselle, is that correct?
That's correct. That's the dog that was with me in the World Trade Center.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing story. It was 2 years ago that you were on,
Right.
and I do a lot of interviews for this show, and I don't often remember a lot of the stories and things that come on the show. Yours, I remembered because it was certainly unique and it was certainly an incredible story.
Well, thank you. It's good to be remembered.
And so now you're back and you have a new book called Live Like a Guide Dog. I assume, do you still have a guide dog, a current one?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a dog. His name is Alamo, as in remember the Alamo. He is my eighth guide dog since 1964. He's a black lab. So he's my first black lab.
Are the Labradors the better? I mean, I see them more as guide dogs, emotional support dogs. German Shepherds used to be.
They did, but as training techniques have developed and as the whole process has evolved, what has been discovered is that labs tend to be the dogs that work best or are the most adaptable to be used as guide dogs. And even then, only about half of labs make it, although training techniques are improving. But the idea behind a lab is that they tend to be pretty adaptable. Shepherds are more herding dogs. And so the reality is that not every dog is cut out to be a guide dog. And in fact, even with labs, only 50% are successful at guide dogs, which doesn't mean that they're failures, but that's just not what they do. And the training process has, as I said, evolved, and so now there are more demands being put on what needs to go into a dog. A lot more issues about not dealing with distractions, a lot more issues about being able to function in noisy and other kinds of environments. And so labs tend to just make a little bit better guide dogs than some of the other breeds that are out there.
Is that part of the training process? I mean, is that what they would do is to intentionally distract the dog and the dog needs to keep focused on what its objective is?
Sure, especially in some of the early testing, and even when after they've grown up and matured and they come back for advanced training because they go live with people who are called puppy raisers for a year to 15 months, and a lot of very close observations even during that time, so that the schools know what the dogs are and what they're not. But when they come back again, there are a lot of tests and a lot of things that go on to evaluate them to make sure that they will be able to focus, that they're not going to be frightened by things and so on.
What specific criteria does the dog need to have in order to be a support dog or a guide dog
Well,
for a blind?
support is a different
That's a
issue
different
entirely.
issue,
Emotional
yeah.
support dogs are not service dogs because they're not trained. And the issue with a guide dog is that a guide dog is actually trained to perform a task. So that is what's covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Emotional support dogs aren't trained and are not covered and are not service dogs and don't get to be involved in the rights that people who use them have. When you're using a guide dog, it's a different situation entirely. So if your dog isn't specifically trained, it is not a service dog, and it needs to be understood that there is that difference. But the the criteria are that there is a training process and that the dogs need to go through and pass that training process in order to become a guide dog. It involves a lot of things. It involves learning the different commands. It involves learning even how to not follow a command when the dog believes that the blind person or their handler is in danger. So if I'm walking down a street on a sidewalk and I come to a corner and the dog stops at the curb, and understand that a job of a guide dog is to guide, not to lead. Guide dogs do not lead blind people. The dog's job is to make sure that we walk safely. My job is to know where to go and how to get there. And I have techniques to do that, just like you do as a person who happens to be able to see. But the bottom line is that if I come to a corner and I tell the dog to go forward and the dog doesn't go, my immediate assumption is there's a reason that the dog doesn't want to go. It's not that the dog is being distracted. And I have that knowledge based on learning to work with the dogs. But the bottom line is that when the dog doesn't go, I'm going to assume there's a reason. And it's usually in today's world, something like a quiet car or a hybrid car is coming down the street and the dog doesn't want us to get hit. And so the dog isn't going to go. Or when we're doing any number of different kinds of things as we travel around and the dog does something that I don't expect, my immediate assumption as the team leader and as the person who is directing the dog is that there's a reason that the dog is doing what the dog well, that the dog isn't doing what I want it to do, and that there's a reason the dog is doing what it wants to do. And the other side of that is if I do discover that the dog is being distracted, there will be a meeting of the team and we'll have a discussion about the dog's behavior. And I say that a little bit in jest, but the reality is that you can tell. And so the dog is encouraged to do the right thing. And it's my job as the leader of the team to encourage the dog, to praise the dog, to let the dog know that I like what the dog is doing. And if the dog is misbehaving, then to use maybe a little bit of a leash correction, nothing harsh or whatever, but I need to do some things to say, no, that's not what I want you to do.
Do you get to choose the dog? I mean, is there, I hate to use the term, trial period, but I mean, when you go to get another dog, do you go through like a probationary period and get to know the dog first before you decide if this is the one that's going to work best for you?
The way the process works is that the trainers, when someone applies and is accepted to go to the guide dog school, the trainers get a lot of information about that person. And that includes having had someone visit the individual, see how they walk, how fast they walk, see how well oriented they are to their environment, how independent they are able to function, and so on. And so by the time I get the dog, the trainers of the class involved in this situation have really determined that this is probably the best dog from their string or from the school that has been trained to serve the needs that I have. How much do I travel? Where do I travel? Am I in the city a lot? Am I in the country a lot? Or just any number of things that go into it. So the assumption is it's the right dog. But even then, when I go and attend a training class with the dog, which is at Guide Dogs for the Blind, where I go a 2-week course typically, there is still evaluations going on. Because even when the dog might physically be the best fit, we have to get along emotionally as well. And so any number of things that can happen that will make us decide, no, this isn't really the right fit, or this is the right fit. My 6th guide dog started out doing a very good job, but Merrill was a dog that I describe as a type A personality. She couldn't leave work at the office. When we got home and I took the harness off, she would still want to follow me around. She wouldn't play with Roselle, my retired guide dog, or Fantasia, my wife's service dog. My wife was in a wheelchair during her whole life. And so the bottom line of all of that is that Merrill was so focused and not able to play and relax at all that the bottom line is that what eventually happened was it all stressed her out. And after about 18 months, she became afraid of guiding and working, so had to retire. So guiding is a very stressful thing. The dogs take it very seriously. They do expect and need the support from me and other handlers who are using them to keep that stress level as low as possible. But in Merrill's case, there was nothing that we could do. And eventually she just became afraid of guiding and had to retire.
So let's get over to your book because we got just about a minute or two. So live like a guide dog.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I realized that although I've been traveling and speaking and continue now to do that, talking about leadership and teamwork and trust and so on, and being a public speaker traveling the world, I've talked a lot about escaping, but I've never really taught people how they can learn to control fear. And we have fear all around us. I mean, our politicians push fear a lot. They won't admit it necessarily, but they do. We are always afraid of every little thing. We are always what ifing everything that comes along rather than focusing on what we can control. And so I decided to write a book and collaborated with a woman, Carrie Wyatt Kent, and we wrote Live Like a Guide Dog, true stories from a blind man and his dogs about being brave, overcoming adversity, and moving forward in faith. And the idea is to show people that they can learn to control fear. And rather than when something happens, having a fear reaction and being, if you will, blinded or paralyzed and not being able to make a decision, you can use fear as a powerful tool to help you focus and deal with whatever comes along. And so Live Like a Guide Dog is all about teaching people to do that. And one of the things that we talk about is dogs don't do what if. Roselle didn't do what if after the World Trade Center. When it was over for her. And unfortunately, we what if all sorts of things, for example, that, we have no control over. And the idea is to train yourself and to train your mind to focus on the things that you really can deal with. People may not like that concept, but the reality is they're afraid of everything that comes along rather than just worrying about the things that they can truly have any effect over and not letting the rest of it make them afraid.
Roselle must have been an amazing dog because it would be really difficult to train for a 9/11 scenario.
Well, and you can't,
wouldn't
and
it?
you can't.
And you can't, yeah.
The fact of the matter is, who would have thought? And the fact is, Roselle did exactly what she would normally do and what she was trained to do. She focused, but I also focused a lot on encouraging her, telling her as we went down the stairs, and then later as we were moving through the city, what a good dog, good girl, keep going. It was my job to keep her focused and to not allow her to be stressed because she had to sense all the fear and tension around us. But it was my job to say, no, we're okay. And to give her that support so that she would focus in doing her job. And the reality is, on September 11th, nothing directly threatened her. So she was able to focus. And when we got home, the first thing she did, rather than even going outside, was to go find her favorite tugboat and started playing tug of war with my retired guide dog, Linny, because when it was over for Roselle, it was over. And I do talk a lot about what if, and that's because dogs don't do that. Dogs live in the moment, and we need to learn more about doing that ourselves.
All right. Well, Michael, we got to wrap this up. So the book is called Live Like a Guide Dog. Has it been released?
Well, it will actually come on. It is available for pre-order from
okay.
Amazon and Audible and so on, but the book will actually be released on August 20th.
Last question. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
michaelhingson.com, www.michaelhingson.com. And they can go there, and there's a link so that they can go to a page where they can learn about pre-ordering Live Like a Guide Dog. I also do a podcast called Unstoppable Mindset, and there are links to that podcast page on my website as well. And there's a contact form so that if people are looking for a speaker to come and talk about leadership and teamwork and trust or whatever, I'd love to hear from them and see if we can find a way to work together.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming back on the show. It was nice seeing you again. And,
good talking with you, and my pleasure.
Best of luck with the book. I hope it does well.
I do too. Thank you.